3 days ago, Donald Trump did what nobody in Britain's political class had the guts to do. He went on live television and absolutely torched Keir Starmer in front of the world. Over 50 million Americans watched as Trump, in full force, told the British Prime Minister to stop policing American free speech and start fixing his own moral mess. And when Trump goes off, you know it's not polite diplomacy, it's a public execution with words. He didn't hold back, didn't sugarcoat, didn't even blink. He said out loud what every ordinary Brit has been screaming at their TV for months. And within minutes, Starmer's carefully built image of the reasonable leader was ripped apart like tissue paper. Trump exposed the kind of scandal that makes taxpayers want to throw their remotes at the screen. Leaked documents showed that Starmer's government had spent a mind-blowing $1.2 billion, yes, billion, on luxury hotel rooms for illegal migrants. And these weren't basic rooms. We're talking 4-star suites, buffets, spa treatments, ocean views, all funded by people struggling to pay their own heating bills. Meanwhile, British war veterans, the same men who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, were sleeping on pavements. Trump didn't even need to exaggerate it. The facts did the roasting for him. And that's when the photo dropped. The one that broke Britain's heart. Royal Marine veteran James Patterson, who had served 3 tours of duty, was found living in a cardboard box outside a McDonald's in central London. 3 tours. A man who literally risked his life for the Union Jack was eating scraps under a streetlight while the people who crossed the border illegally were enjoying room service. When that image hit the news, even the most loyal Labour supporters couldn't defend Starmer anymore. You could feel the anger boiling through the country. US media picked up the story instantly. CNN, Fox, everyone ran with it. Headlines screamed, "Moral collapse in London," and "Britain betrays its heroes." Trump's line from that speech, "Britain has forgotten what it means to honour those who serve," became a global rallying cry. He didn't just hit Starmer politically. He hit him morally, right in the gut. That single sentence split the Western alliance in 2. On one side, the US president who stood up for veterans. On the other, a British Prime Minister who spent billions pampering migrants while war heroes froze. Trump didn't need to visit London to roast him. He did it from thousands of miles away and left the man politically naked. But Trump wasn't finished. The very next day, the markets delivered the second slap. Within 48 hours of that speech, American tech firms started pulling their money out of Britain faster than you could refresh the stock ticker. The US-UK trade deal, worth hundreds of billions, was suddenly on hold indefinitely. It wasn't a rumor, it was a financial earthquake. The pound tanked. Tech stocks nosedived. Billions evaporated like steam. Google announced it was moving its European content moderation headquarters to Ireland. Microsoft followed by relocating key operations to Germany, politely citing uncertain regulatory conditions. Everyone knew what that meant. Nobody wanted to operate under Starmer's so-called digital fairness laws, the same laws that tried to muzzle American platforms. Treasury officials were practically hiding under their desks, whispering about the cost of this fiasco. The losses weren't in millions. They were talking hundreds of billions in future trade and investment gone. One insider called it a self-inflicted sanction. And honestly, that's exactly what it was. No one sanctioned Britain except its own incompetent Prime Minister. And here's where it gets worse for Starmer. Because when you've got Trump roasting you economically, the last thing you want is your own king joining in. But that's exactly what happened. During a veterans' charity gala, King Charles stood at the podium and delivered one of the most subtle but savage royal takedowns in history. He looked out across the crowd, full of veterans and dignitaries, and said, "Those who have served this nation with honor deserve our care before all others." Those 4 words, "before all others," hit Westminster like a bomb. Nobody missed the meaning. It wasn't a speech about veterans. It was a direct royal rebuke aimed right at Downing Street. Charles didn't name Starmer. He didn't have to. Everyone knew he was roasting the Prime Minister in real time. The room fell silent. You could almost hear the collective gasp from the front rows of government officials.
Even the BBC commentators, usually so careful, couldn't hide it. One of them said live, "That sounded like a message to number 10. Palace insiders later revealed that Charles had been quietly funding homeless shelters for veterans from his own private fortune. Think about that. The king, out of his personal wealth, was helping the same soldiers his government had abandoned. It was the ultimate moral humiliation. On one side, the monarchy literally spending its own money to house British heroes. On the other, a prime minister who spent taxpayers' money on luxury hotels for illegal migrants. It's the kind of comparison no PR team can spin their way out of. For the first time in modern British history, the monarch appeared to side with a foreign leader, Donald Trump, against his own government. That's how far things had fallen. And yet, it didn't feel political. It felt human. Both men, in their own way, pointed out something basic. A country that forgets its veterans forgets itself. The king's intervention was so unexpected, so precise, that it made Starmer look like a moral imposter sitting in the wrong office. Commentators called it a royal intervention that redefined neutrality. They weren't wrong. Charles didn't raise his voice, didn't break any law, didn't step outside protocol. He just spoke with quiet dignity, and those words carried more weight than any parliamentary debate. For 70 years, the British crown had stayed above politics. But that night, Charles reminded everyone that silence isn't always virtue. Sometimes it's complicity. And when he finally spoke, it was a masterclass in controlled fury. The best part? Starmer couldn't respond. How do you argue with the king without digging your own grave? Trump had already hit him with moral artillery from across the Atlantic, and now his own monarch had followed up with a direct shot to the heart. The two men didn't coordinate it, but it looked like a perfectly timed double strike, one public, one royal, both devastating. It started online, but it didn't stay there for long. The hashtag #JoinVeteransFirst wasn't just another social media trend, it turned into a full-blown revolution. For 6 straight days, it dominated every platform from Twitter to TikTok, racking up 2.3 million posts and over 45 million interactions. You couldn't open your phone without seeing the same message screaming back at you. Britain had lost its moral compass. The internet had turned into a courtroom, and Keir Starmer was the defendant.
The visuals did all the damage. Split-screen videos flooded every feed. On one side, footage of illegal migrants enjoying hotel buffets and spa lounges. On the other, British veterans sleeping in freezing doorways with medals pinned to their coats. No government PR team, no carefully worded statement could fight images like that. It wasn't politics anymore. It was shame in HD. You could feel the public's fury growing by the minute. It was the kind of outrage that can't be managed. It spreads like wildfire because it's personal. Then the anger left the screens and hit the streets. Within days, London, Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool turned into massive protest zones. Families, veterans, and middle-class workers stood shoulder to shoulder, chanting one line that echoed through Parliament Square. Homes for heroes, not hotels for migrants. It wasn't a slogan cooked up by politicians. It was raw, unfiltered anger. Police had to seal off Westminster Bridge as tens of thousands filled the streets, waving flags and holding photos of forgotten veterans. Some were in wheelchairs, others missing limbs, holding signs that said, "Why are we forgotten?" You couldn't look at those faces and not feel it. This wasn't a left versus right issue anymore. Analysts started calling it a moral uprising. People weren't marching for parties or policies. They were marching for decency, for fairness, for basic humanity. The whole country had realized that when veterans are sleeping on sidewalks while tax money funds hotel jacuzzis for migrants, something is deeply broken. And Starmer. He stayed hidden behind his press team, pretending it was business as usual while his country turned against him. Inside Downing Street, things went from chaotic to catastrophic. Cabinet meetings that were supposed to be about policy became screaming matches. Ministers demanded an immediate review of the migrant spending scandal, but Starmer refused to back down, insisting the government had it under control. Under control. The streets were on fire, the markets were tanking, and his own ministers were ready to mutiny. 3 junior ministers privately warned that his policies had become politically toxic. One even told colleagues that supporting him now was career suicide. Meanwhile, at least 40 backbench MPs publicly distanced themselves from the government line. 40. That's not rebellion. That's a collapse in slow motion. Senior figures inside the party started circulating letters demanding Starmer either reverse course or step down altogether. Leaked WhatsApp messages described the party mood as apocalyptic. You could tell the ship was sinking because everyone on board was suddenly running toward the lifeboats. And as Labour tore itself apart, Reform UK was celebrating. Nigel Farage's Veterans First campaign shot up 8 points in just 1 week, draining Labour's working class base like a political blood transfusion. The very voters who once called Labour their party were now saying, enough. The momentum was shifting fast. Even international allies could see it. Officials from Australia, Canada and the European Union started expressing open concern about Britain's moral direction. One EU diplomat called it a democracy in crisis. Imagine that, the world watching Britain, the cradle of modern democracy, spiral into moral chaos because its leader forgot what the word honour meant. By the time Parliament met again, the humiliation had reached boiling point. During Prime Minister's questions, Conservative MP Sarah Henderson stood up and held a photo of veteran James Patterson, the same man Trump had mentioned in his speech, the same veteran King Charles had quietly helped. The chamber went dead silent as she asked, "Why does this man sleep in the cold while illegal migrants sleep in 4-star hotels?" It wasn't just a question, it was a dagger through Starmer's reputation. Starmer looked like a man caught in headlights. He shuffled through his notes, stammered through half-written talking points, and completely lost the room. MPs on both sides jeered as he struggled to form a coherent sentence. You could see it in his face, the panic, the disbelief, the realization that the entire moral structure of his leadership had just crumbled in front of millions watching. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore, it was collapse. Foreign investors saw the same thing and didn't wait around. They pulled their money out of Britain at record speed. The pound wobbled again. The markets tumbled. Treasury officials quietly admitted the standoff with America, and the public fury at home could cost the UK hundreds of billions more in lost confidence. It was no longer a political scandal. It was an economic and moral implosion wrapped into one. Political analysts started using words like finished and irreversible. They called it the perfect storm. Trump's moral clarity from across the Atlantic, King Charles's quiet royal rebuke from within, and a British Prime Minister stuck between both, crumbling under pressure. The two most unexpected figures, one American firebrand and one British monarch, had managed to do what no opposition party could: expose the emptiness at the heart of Starmer's government. Every screen in Britain told the same story. On one side, images of luxury hotel suites glowing with taxpayer-funded comfort. On the other, veterans in cardboard boxes clutching Union Jacks for warmth. That single contrast said more than any speech could. It was Britain's moral mirror, and it reflected a government collapsing under the weight of its own hypocrisy. Trump had delivered the fire, Charles had delivered the grace. Together they didn't just humiliate Starmer, they buried the illusion of his leadership. And as the crowds chanted outside and investors fled inside, the message was clear. The King and the President had spoken, and Britain had finally listened.